This Parsha podcast is dedicated in honor of a new baby, Yosef Simcha Borowski, the new son of our dear friends David and Chana Borowski, on behalf of the entire Parsha podcast family and the extended Torch family. We wish them a hearty Mazel Tov on Yosef Simcha. I was very much struck by the name because Yosef means to add and Simcha means joy. So Yosef Simcha means to add, to increase, to augment joy. What a beautiful combination of names. May he live up to his name. May Yosef Simcha indeed add and increase joy to his family and to the entire Jewish nation and become a beacon of light who brings honor and glory to his family, to his parents, to his nation, and of course, to his Creator. I have a bit of a confession to make. It's been 16 days since I last sat behind the glorious microphone at the Torch Center in Houston, Texas to record a podcast. It's the longest absence without recording in many years. And I thought I would come to this Parsha podcast and say, it was so painful. I had withdrawal symptoms. I don't know how I managed. I woke up sweaty and terrible nightmares. The confession is I kind of liked it. And I feel terrible and even a little guilty saying it. It's blasphemous, but it's true. I kind of liked it. And I thought maybe I just needed a little vacation, a breather, a short respite. And the calendar was just perfectly designed. There's a week with no Parsha. We managed to do a Parsha podcast earlier. So maybe I just needed it. And I did think about it as we're getting towards the end of the semester before Pesach. I felt like I was running out of words. Like the words are just depleted. I've exhausted all the words. I was finished. There's nothing left in the tank. And I really enjoyed the respite. Maybe it was just a well-needed break. Because I always thought, we're tough. We're Walbies. Vacations, that's for chumps. People who are too weak, who have low stamina, who are fickle. But we come to the Torch Center every day, every week. We're tough. We don't need a vacation. But my confession, I kind of liked it. I was a bit frightened about it. I was scared maybe I would want to do it again and imperil our sacrosanct streak. But I think we're in the clear. I think we replenished all the words. Pesach was delightful, was lovely. It went by so fast. It was really special. We had maybe the best Seder yet. The first Seder was amazing. The second Seder was from a different level. It was a different stratosphere. The second Seder, as a youth, Pesach was always interminable. No bagels and no pizza and no pretzels for 8 days. It's totally unmanageable. But I felt like I could have done another week. As Pesach was winding down, I'm like, is that it? Are we done? That went by too fast. It was a tease. It was wonderful, delightful, fantastic. Pesach is over. We're in the summer season. And we're back in the Torch Center. I may be a bit rusty because I haven't done this in a while. Let me know how I did. RabbiWalby@gmail.com. And one more thing before we start. Thank God it looks like we got our mail back in order. I want to thank our indefatigable administrator, Anna, for your repeated trips to the post office. It looks like it's all sorted out. Send us your mail. Resume to the new Torch Center address. Send in the mail anything, almost anything. I don't want any white powder of any sort sent over here. But 9002 Chimney Rock Road, Suite G. Maybe that's why the letter carriers had such a hard time with it. 9002 is Chimney Rock Road, Suite G, Houston, Texas, 77096. It's Parshas Shemini. And our Parsha is neatly divided with two distinct sections. It begins on the 8th day, the day of the completion of the inauguration of the Tabernacle, where Moshe is going to hand over the reins to Aaron. It's day 8, Yom HaShemini, the 8th day. The inauguration of the Tabernacle has been completed. And Aaron brings all the sacrifices, and the fire descends from heaven, and it consumes the sacrifice, and the nation erupts with delight, with awe, with trepidation. The presence of God is truly in the tabernacle. The nation reaches a peak, an apogee, an apotheosis, a level of ecstasy that is shattered, that is marred, that is dampened by one of the greatest tragedies of our history. On the very same day where the presence of God descended into the tabernacle, the two crown princes, the two crown jewels of the people, the heir apparents of Moshe and Aaron, two young princes who Moshe testified were greater on some level than he and Aaron, Aaron's two sons, Nadav and Avihu. They bring an unauthorized sacrifice, and a second fire descends and consumes them, and they die on this very same day. The day began with really no priests. This is the day that 5 men became priests, Aaron and his 4 sons, and the population of priests was almost instantly reduced by 40%. Nadav and Avihu perished. The remaining priests are told they may not mourn. The whole house of Israel will mourn on their behalf, but you may not perform any of the activities, any of the customs of mourning. God speaks with Aaron and tells him the commandment, the prohibition against drinking wine and doing service in the temple. There's a bit of a brouhaha regarding what to do with these sacrifices. There's lots of sacrifices on this day, and there's a bit of a disagreement between Moshe and Aaron regarding the eligibility of mourners to eat from one of the sacrifices of the day. Aaron does something, Moshe questions it, Aaron presents his logic, and Moshe accepts it. That's part 1 of the Parsha, the wrap-up of the tabernacle, the handover of the reins to Aaron, the day's sacrifices that ended in tragedy. And part 2 is the laws of kosher and non-kosher, kosher animals, kosher birds, kosher fish, grasshoppers, rodents, purity, impurity. That wraps up the Parsha. And I want to focus on the beginning of the Parsha. It's Parshas Shemini, which means the 8th. 8th what? First verse of our Parsha. It's on the 8th day. And Moshe summoned Aaron and his sons and the elders and tells them the instructions of all the different sacrifices. It's the 8th day. In the previous Parsha, Parshas Tzav, we read about the 7 preceding days. The beginning of the inauguration, the week plus of inauguration, it was on the 23rd day of Adar. For 7 days, there was this unusual setup where Moshe, a Levite, Moshe served as an interim high priest. And the Kohanim, Aaron and his 4 sons, were being trained. They were his apprentices. And for 7 days, Moshe assembled the tabernacle by himself, did all the work as if he were the high priest. And then when the day's work was finished, he disassembled the tabernacle, restoring it back to just its parts. And for those 7 days, Aaron and his 4 sons, they had to remain inside the site. They were not allowed to leave. For 7 days, Moshe is acting as a one-man show every morning, assembling the tabernacle, doing all the services while dressed as a priest, disassembling it and repeating it the following day. For 7 days, he did that. Now it's Yom HaShmini, it's the 8th day. Moshe will assemble the tabernacle for the 8th time on the 8th day. And this time, he will not disassemble it. He will hand over the reins to Aaron and his sons. Henceforth, Aaron and his sons are the only priests, the only Kohanim. I want to focus on this unusual setup, this system of assembly and disassembly. What was it like to build the tabernacle? It was a very elaborate activity. Got to put the silver sockets on the bottom, and you got to place the beams, each beam into 2 different sockets. And they have the golden rings on top of the vertical beams, and they have the horizontal bars that went on each side of the vertical beams. You had the snaking bar that went through, turned corners, as we spoke about. You had to cover with the 4 different covers. You had to lay out the whole courtyard. It was lots of work. And Moshe did it himself. 7 days in a row, built it, did all the work in the tabernacle, and then disassembled it once the day's work was finished. This reminded me of the trauma, the yearly trauma, to build a sukkah. I went to yeshiva. They didn't teach us anything about that. I don't know what to do with, I got to pull out all my tools for that yearly tradition. There's this running joke that if you ever see a yeshiva guy in Home Depot, you know that Sukkot is around the corner, and they're looking around, and the place is just a maze, and you try to find a worker, and they're dodging away from you. What's happening? They're trying to avoid you. And imagine you do all the work, and you finally build your sukkah. And you got to take it down and build it again tomorrow. No, this is a once-a-year thing. But this is building a sukkah times 1,000. The detail, the intricateness of the tabernacle. And Moshe does the whole thing, day 1, does all the work, and then just takes it apart. Restores it back to its component pieces. And does it again the next day. Assembly, disassembly, assembly, disassembly, for 7 days. And only on the 8th day does he do what I would have done day 1, build it. Okay, now finally it's done. We'll need to disassemble it once it's time to move. But this is not something you want to do again and again. So what's the reason? What's the insight? What's the lesson? What's the secret behind the 7 assemblies, disassemblies before day 8? So maybe you would argue, this is something you need to practice. It's like spring training. You can't just jump into it. What's going to be if you don't know all the pieces and all the parts in the right order, the sequencing of assembly and disassembly? That's a good argument. Some of the commentators tell us that there's something much more profound happening over here. This is the assembly of the tabernacle. The tabernacle, ever since that time, 3,300 plus years ago, has been a feature of Jewish life. The tabernacle accompanied the nation 40 years in the wilderness, and they got to Israel, and they took the tabernacle to Israel, and they installed it in Gilgal and Shiloh, Nov, Givon, and then, of course, Solomon built the first temple, which is like a permanent tabernacle. It was destroyed 400 plus years later. Ezra built the second temple. It was destroyed 400 some odd years later. And ever since then, we've been hoping and pining and praying and yearning for the third temple. You look at our prayers, daily prayers, many of them, maybe even a majority of the prayers, have some connection with the temple. In fact, the 3 daily prayers correspond to the 3 main components of the daily pattern, the daily sacrifices and offerings in the temple, in the tabernacle. So this is a very big part of our life. And if you were to analyze the history of the sanctuary, both the tabernacle, the Mishkan, and the temple, and you were to count how many different versions of this we've had, you'll come up with a very specific number. In the wilderness, there was a tabernacle. In Gilgal, there was a tabernacle. That's 2. Shiloh, 3. Nov, 4. Givon, 5. First temple, 6. Second temple, 7. Now we don't have a temple as of this recording. The temple was erected, it was assembled, and then it was put away. It was disassembled. It was destroyed. It was not present. Moshe did this 7 times to kind of prophesy, to symbolize the history of our people with respect to the tabernacle, to the temple, to the sanctuary. There are 7 places, 7 circumstances, 7 situations in which we had a temple, a tabernacle, a sanctuary. And we had it and we lost it, but only once day 8, the 8th time comes around, is it built and not taken apart. It's assembled and not disassembled. So Moshe is symbolizing with his week of inauguration that there's going to be 7 instances where there's going to be a building and erection of the tabernacle and it will be disassembled. But you should know there will be an 8th instant where there will be eternality to the tabernacle, to the sanctuary. The 8th is the permanent one. And thus the tabernacle is inaugurated on day 8. It's built and it is not taken apart. I like this idea a lot. Maybe it's very simple, but I think it's encouraging to know that there was a process of building and disassembly, and that was all part of the plan. But just as we read in our Parsha, this is the Parsha that focuses on that, or that hints towards, that alludes towards, that prophesies about the 8th day and the 8th time of the building of the tabernacle. And when we read it, maybe we should get a little bit of comfort in knowing that this is in the cards. It always was in the cards, and we hope to witness it very soon. So that's maybe a second idea. Idea number 1, practice. You got to practice. Idea number 2, this is foretelling the history of the tabernacle and the sanctuary and the temple. And I want to suggest maybe a new idea. A different idea. As we mentioned in the past many times, all of us are trying to build our own tabernacle. At the very beginning of the instruction of the tabernacle, God tells Moshe, "V'asuli mikdash, build for me, they will build for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell in them," not in it, in them. We don't have a temple, a tabernacle. It may be unwise to try to take aggressive, active steps to build it. Maybe we should. I don't know. That's a big debate. But certainly, all of us have the capacity to create within ourselves an area, a domicile, a place, a little corner within which God, so to speak, can dwell. A spiritual edifice of our own. And Moshe, of course, in the maximal, so to speak, tabernacle, I think it's very interesting to observe, he built it. And the next day, it was not built. It was once again just component pieces. It was assembled. And then it came apart. If you were there on day 1 and you see, well, the tabernacle's finally assembled, I'm going to come back tomorrow just to visit it again. You come back tomorrow and what happened? It's just pieces like it was for months before it was initially assembled. But Moshe rebuilds. And it comes apart, he takes it apart, and he rebuilds. Again and again, 7 times. It's built, it's disassembled, and only the 8th time is the charm. Only the 8th time is it built to last. There's a famous verse in Scripture that tells us that when a righteous person is building an edifice, a spiritual edifice within themselves, it doesn't happen on the first go. The righteous falls 7 times. Proverbs tells us, Sheva yipol tzaddik. And he gets up. And we've mentioned this in the past, how the verse is not describing to us a system in which the righteous gets up and flourishes and becomes righteous notwithstanding their falls, not despite the 7 falls. But actually there is a process to become a righteous person. And that requires some stumbling along the way. There's no way, our sages tell us, that a righteous person could have achieved their lofty distinction unless they stumbled. So maybe, just maybe, the building of the tabernacle, that is going to be a valuable insight for us, a heuristic for us, to know that when we build our tabernacle, it's not going to be first time's the charm. It must undergo a period of 7 times falling, and only the 8th time enduring. The path of ascent is a path marked by hardship, by challenge, by struggle, by failure, by 7 falls. That is the system working as intended. So I wanted to propose on the Parsha podcast that maybe that's the lesson, or that's a lesson that we can glean from the building of the original tabernacle. 7 times it's built, only to see it being disassembled. The 8th time is the charm. 7 times the righteous falls, and he gets up. But why 7? 7 falls, 7 disassemblies. Why not 3? 3rd time's the charm, you've heard that? Is that a random number? So I want to propose the following idea. The Talmud tells us that there are 7 names given to the Yetzer Hara, to the evil inclination, to the force trying to stop us from achieving greatness. The Almighty has a name for this entity. It's called evil. Moshe has a name for this entity. It's called uncircumcised, Arel. David has a name. It's called impure. Solomon has a name. It's called a hater. Isaiah calls it a stumbling block. Ezekiel calls it a stone heart. And finally, the prophet Joel, he calls it the internal one. This is the Talmud in the book of Sukkah on page 52a. 7 names for the evil inclination. And we know a name is an identity. It's an essence. If there are 7 names, you can argue that there are 7 dimensions to the force trying to stop us from achieving greatness. Now, parenthetically, you'll be maybe a bit disturbed to learn that the Talmud elsewhere tells us that there are 7 names given to Gehenom. Well, what's Gehenom? Gehenom, that's purgatory. And there are 7 dimensions of that. So I thought that made sense. Well, if there's 7 forces trying to keep us away from greatness, then, and the venue where someone who does not achieve greatness, well, that's called Gehenom, and there's 7 different places. Well, maybe each one of those stumbling blocks can lead us towards a portal to purgatory. I want to suggest the reason why there are 7 assemblies and disassemblies, and the righteous falls 7 times before he achieves supremacy over those falls, is because every single triumph of greatness must overcome the force designed to foil said greatness, must overcome the Yetzer Hara. And there's no way to do it without tackling each one of these different dimensions separately. When Moshe erected the tabernacle the first time, and the next day it's back where we started, you and I may say, well, nothing's been accomplished. He built it, but now it's disassembled. He took it apart. You're exactly where you started. Maybe, just maybe, the first effort, the first time the righteous fell, he actually triumphed. He defeated one of those 7 obstacles. And this is a theme we see elsewhere in our literature. I think I told you once this story, maybe a year or 2 ago, about the great sage whose son was maybe not applying himself to his studies in the yeshiva. And he said, I could be a better student than my son. We're going to go swap places. One of us has to maybe work. Let it be the one who's more productive who's in yeshiva. And then he goes to the yeshiva and they find out that he's coming and he's a great sage. And they say, nobody give him a place to stay. He'll be forced to stay in the academy because there was a monster, a serpent with 7 heads in the academy who was tormenting everyone. And they forced this great visiting rabbi, great sage, to go have a nocturnal encounter with this 7-headed serpent. And he gets there, he tries to find a place to stay. No one wants to host him, so he has to go to the Beis Medrash, to the academy, open 24/7. He gets there, and he's the only one there, and he's attacked by the 7-headed beast. And he starts to pray, and every time he prays and he bows, one of the head gets lopped off. And in the morning, there's a whole discussion, shall we say, about the appropriateness of them denying housing to him, to force him to have this showdown with this 7-headed monster. But this is, the commentaries already connected. There's a force. It's compared to a serpent. It has 7 heads, has 7 dimensions, has 7 names. When Jacob reunites with his brother, remember that story, Jacob, Esau, that's a long time ago. That's in Genesis. So there were twins, Jacob and his brother Esau, and they didn't exactly get along. And Esau wants to kill him, and he has to run away and comes back 20-something years later. And when they reunite, this is in chapter 33:3, so 3:3 of Genesis, Jacob bows 7 times before approaching Esau. And the commentaries will tell us, you want to defeat Esau, you want to destroy the serpent who is impeding your path of ascent. There are 7 different dimensions. You got to lop off all 7 heads of this monster if you want to be able to succeed. And when Jacob was bowing, it wasn't like he was just showing deference. It was a method of overcoming, of submission to God, to eliminate one of the elements of the foreign God, to neutralize Esau element by element, serpent head by serpent head. What does it take to build a permanent tabernacle? You have to triumph in 7 different dimensions. You must overpower 7 different elements of Esav. You must wrestle and overcome these 7 names of the evil inclination. Names of different obstacles impeding your progress. So you build a tabernacle. And Moshe is showing us all that work. That gorgeous, glorious, impressive, magnificent tabernacle that worked so hard to build. It will come down. And it will happen again and again. And most people will get so disenchanted and so dispirited by watching all their hard work come apart. They just won't have the heart to rebuild. It was so much effort to do it the first time. They're just exhausted. So maybe they'll do it again, twice, 3 times. What does it take to be a tzaddik? To have an eternal, permanent tabernacle? You have to fall down 7 times. You have to build a tabernacle, take it apart 7 times, and get up. Because once the 8th time comes around, that's when you can have a permanent edifice. Moshe is simulating for us, what does it take? You want to build a tabernacle within yourself like God is telling us to do? I'll just assemble all the ingredients, the gold and the silver and the copper and all the wools and all the things needed. And I'll hire all the artisans and I'll put together all the components and I'll build it all. You have to be ready to build and do it again and again, because you're building something which will arouse 7 different oppositions. And while you may not notice a tangible difference between the first time and the 3rd time and the 5th time that you tried to do it, and just imagine how disappointing it would look like to a person. You got to take it all apart. After all that work, on day 2, on day 3, and day 4, all that for naught. And the net result, after day 5, it's just been 5 days of this. And all I have is just this pile of parts. Back to square one. The change is not visible to the naked eye, but behind the scenes, you are lopping off the head of the serpent one by one. He who must not be named. This is a joke for my kids, or like a little. I always try to get them to listen. They're not going to listen to the podcast. I'll tell them I spoke about you on the podcast. I made a little reference to your favorite book. They're not going to listen. I'll say it anyhow. Well, he who must not be named must be killed 7 times. Okay, that was the idea. Let's get to this week's dilemma. The dilemma. What to do when your plans go off track, when there are unexpected setbacks that stymie your progress, when things don't go as planned. How do you react? Who do you blame? Moshe appoints Aaron. Approach the altar. Process the sacrifices. You will be the implement to bring about the presence of God. You're going to be the Kohen, the high priest. You're going to do all the work to bring the Shekhinah, to bring the presence of God down to the tabernacle. They've been working on this project for a half a year almost. It's the first day of Nisan. They started it the day after Moshe descended on Yom Kippur. So it's the 11th day of Tishrei. It's 10 days shy of a half a year. The whole nation's been working on this. And this is the day. And Aaron is the tool to bring about the presence of God. And Aaron does all that he needs to do. He slaughters all the sacrifices and does all the processing. And everyone's there. The whole nation's there. And everyone's watching. And everyone's waiting. Everyone's anticipating some sign that this was actually a success. And nothing happened. And the verse tells us, this is chapter 9, verse 23. Moshe and Aaron entered the sanctuary. They entered and they exited. Why did they enter? Why did they exit? So Rashi offers 2 interpretations. The second interpretation is that Aaron did all the work, everything. He processed all the sacrifices. He did all the actions to a T. And there was no sign from God. There was no Shekhinah, the presence of God did not descend. And Aaron was dejected. And remember, the whole nation's watching. And these are some tough critics. They've seen a lot. They've seen Sinai. They've seen the 10 plagues. This is a hard A tough crowd, as they say. The comedians say it's a tough crowd. You really have to wow them. Stiff-necked people. And Aaron's supposed to do it, and everyone's watching, and nothing happens. And Aaron tells Moshe, I know what happened over here. I know that God is angry at me. And I know the only reason why the presence of God has not descended, it's all because of me. And he turns to Moshe and he says, Moshe, my brother, what did you do to me? You set me up. You told me to do this, and now I'm embarrassed because everything's supposed to happen now, and I'm supposed to do it, and nothing happened. So they entered. Moshe entered. Aaron entered. They entered to pray. And once they prayed, the presence of God descended. And this is a fascinating discussion between Moshe and Aaron. Maybe the most important lesson for us is that all the work in the world is never complete without prayer. They did everything, yes, but the clincher of any project must always be prayer. But it's fascinating to observe Aaron's diagnosis of the problem. The only person who's guilty, who's responsible for the lack of the presence of God, it's only me. He points the blame squarely on himself. Now, there's a whole nation. And there's lots of people who could be candidates for the reason why the presence of God does not or had not descended. Aaron is the second greatest of the Jews. This is Aaron, the priest, the high priest. After Moshe, he's definitely number 2. And what does he say? How does he diagnose the problem? It's only my fault. Now, I think many of us may say, well, of course, this is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to look inwardly and blame ourselves when things don't go exactly as expected. But I think that even though maybe we say that, it's very hard to actually do it. Because our tendency is always to say, I'm pretty good. Not perfect, but I'm pretty good. There's got to be someone else amongst the 600,000 people. Maybe they have something to say as to why the presence of God does not descend. And I want to maybe broaden this idea by looking at the end of the Parsha. Animals. Some are kosher. Some are not kosher. To be kosher, an animal must have 2 signs. It must have split hooves, and it must re-chew its cud. Now, most animals have neither. Some animals have both, and there's a list of 4 animals, we're told, that have one, but not the other. And those are the most interesting animals in this list. If you read about for example, the pig. The pig actually does have split hooves. It doesn't chew its cud, and that's why it's not kosher. But this is the only animal the Torah tells us that has that combination. It does have split hooves, does not chew its cud. And what's fascinating is if you look at the verse, this is in chapter 11, verse 7. So it's like the opposite of 7:11. 7:11 is always a favorite of ours. This is the opposite, 11:7. When the Torah tells us why the pig is not kosher, it says, because what would I say? I would say a pig's not kosher because even though it has the split hooves, it doesn't chew its cud. So the reason why it's not kosher is because it doesn't chew its cud. The verse says the opposite. It's not kosher because it has split hooves. It has split hooves and does not chew its cud. So you look at the verse, it seems like it's designed, and the other three animals that have the other orientation, the way the verse is designed, it seems to miss the point. It seems to bury the lead. The pig, well, it has split hooves. It doesn't chew its cud. So the reason why it's not kosher is it doesn't chew its cud. That's not what the verse says. It's not kosher because it does have split hooves. And it doesn't chew its cud. It's one of those textual observations that the commentaries note. And one of the commentaries suggests, and this is already brought down in the Midrash, this idea. If you ever see a pig loitering around, relaxing, it does something very specific with its feet. It sticks them out. It projects its split hooves for all to see. The pig, of course, it's a creation of God, but it has a quality, it symbolizes a quality of something not being kosher, yet projecting itself as being something which it's not. It says, look at me, I'm kosher, I have these split hooves. And thus, the fact that it has split hooves is a reason for it to not be kosher, because that is a sign of not kosher. It's a sign of its impurity, because it is falsely portraying itself as being kosher when it is not. Now, similarly, the commentaries tell us that the camel, when it is relaxing, it takes its two unhooved front feet and it folds it under its body and sticks its long neck out to give the opposite impression. Look at me, I chew my cud. I'm kosher. And its missing signs, so to speak, are hidden under it. So we learn about these animals and this type of behavior that seems to falsely portray righteousness. And I was thinking that this is almost like the opposite of Aaron. Aaron was holy. He was certainly of the holiest of the nation. The only person that we could say is greater than Aaron is Moshe. But even our sages tell us that Moshe and Aaron were like 1 and 1A. They're always together. It says Aaron and Moshe, Moshe and Aaron, because they're the same. They're shkulim, they're equal. So Aaron's like the absolute greatest, and he says, no, I'm the guilty party. He is holy, he is worthy, but he projects himself as being unworthy. Here we have the pig. The pig is unholy, it's unworthy, it's unkosher, it's impure, and it does the opposite. It says, look at me, I'm kosher, I'm righteous, I'm worthy. Now, it's interesting. The Torah talks about 4 animals that have one sign but not the other. And there's a bit of a debate as to the identity of some of these animals. It starts off with the camel, the gumel, and then there's the shafan, arneves, and finally the chazir, which is the pig. And the Midrash tells us, very interesting. These 4 hybrids, meaning animals that have one sign not the other, they correspond to the 4 exiles. As we know, it's one of the major themes of Jewish history. There are 4 exiles. And the Gamal, the camel, corresponds to the Babylonian exile, and the Shafan is to the Media and Persian Media. And the Arneves, which is the 3rd animal, that's Yavan, that's Greece. And the current exile, the nearly 2,000-year-old exile, that corresponds to the pig. So we have 3 animals that chew their cud, but don't have split hoofs. And they correspond to the first 3 exiles. And then we have the fourth animal, the fourth hybrid animal, the one that has one but not the other. And that corresponds to the current exile, the much longer exile. And that's the pig. And the pig is the only animal that has the orientation where the flaws is internal. I know this is probably a lot of moving parts here, but if you lost me again, I said I'm rusty. I haven't recorded a podcast in a couple of weeks. So I'm maybe losing my touch. But what you need to know just for this point is that the Talmud tells us, the Midrash tells us, that the pig corresponds to the current exile that we're in. This exile is symbolized by the pig. It has split hooves, but it doesn't chew its cud. And the Gaon of Vilna observes the first three, they did chew their cud, but did not have split hooves. Their flaw, their non-kosher feature was external. If you want to fix it, you know exactly what you need to do. The flaw is something which is visible. The fourth animal, the fourth exile, it has split hooves. The flaw is internal. It's much harder for us to see, to perceive, and to address. And that's why the fourth exile is so much longer and more difficult to undo, to fix, to rectify. Now, to me, I wanted to zoom out a little bit. If, as we are suggesting, Aaron, even though he's righteous, he's holy, he's worthy, he's pure, he says, I'm not worthy, I'm the least worthy here, I'm the cause why the presence of God is not descending. I'm the only one, no one else is guilty. I am. Notwithstanding his lofty and elevated state, he pointed an accusatory finger on himself. And this is the opposite of the pig, and our exile is the exile symbolized by the pig. Maybe there is some truth to the idea. This is a hard concept for us to live by. Aaron says, I'm pure. Aaron is pure. And he says, he points a finger at himself. Maybe we, as constituents, so to speak, of this exile, we have a little bit of the tendency to project maybe a bit of a rosier picture of ourselves outwardly. And maybe some of our flaws is really internal. We're wired, perhaps, to find merit in ourselves. And any flaws we attribute to others. And our own personal flaws we may be ignorant of. I had an idea, or like an observation, an insight. You've heard about this. Someone needs a new valve in their heart. There's like the artificial valve or the pig valve. Really? That's the only animal? The only animal that has a valve that we can use. Isn't that interesting? I heard that there was a kidney transplant from a pig. Why is it? The one animal that we're told, the only animal in the world, the only animal, the Torah tells us this, the Torah states the claim that this is the only animal that has this orientation, split hooves but does not chew its cud. And this is the animal that symbolizes, so to speak, our exile. It's almost the epitome, the great representation of Esav, of being impure. This is the one that really synchronizes with us nicely. You need a valve. You need this part. Which part should we pull out of the pig for you that you need? Which extra parts, spare parts do you need? I think it's not a coincidence that the animal that's most compatible, so to speak, with us is the pig in our world, in our exile. There is a certain seamless integration with us and the pig. And we have to learn to be more like Aaron. To not project ourselves falsely as being righteous, maybe even when we are righteous, but to point an accusatory finger at ourselves. It's not natural for us. We're much closer to the pig than we are to Aaron. Well, I'm not going to accuse you, but I think that's the tendency that we see. How to win friends and influence people. You've read the book. I read it when I was a teenager. I don't know if I won any friends or influenced any people. Some of the ideas that he says there, I think he starts off the book. I have not read this in 20 years, probably. But I remember he starts off the book with this criminal who's shooting up the cops, but he's writing this letter. Okay, you can look it up. I probably should have looked it up before I started speaking about it publicly. But he's writing this letter accusing everyone of being guilty, and he himself is just flawless. We do have a bit of a tendency to project ourselves as being holier than we are. And Aaron, he does the opposite. So to answer our dilemma, what's the Torah way? What's the more elevated way to deal with failure, with bumps in the road, with unexpected developments when things don't go as planned for Aaron? When the fire does not descend from heaven, when the presence of God does not rest immediately, he says, it's all my fault. I appreciate your attention. Joining us in this first Parsha podcast since the festival of Pesach. I'm looking forward, please God, to getting back into it. I know we started off, I said I was rusty, and I had this confession I have to make that maybe I enjoy my vacation. I had a blast here. I had a blast. I'm so glad to be back in the Torah Center and to be back on schedule with the Parsha podcast. Tuesday evenings, please God, throughout the summer at 8 p.m. Central on torchzoom.com. Have a wonderful day. Oh, have a fantastic rest of your week. A sensational, terrific, uplifting, and meaningful Shabbos Aprami. And please God, we'll have a whole summer of Parsha podcasts. And we'll gather together again next week, please God, for another Parsha podcast. And as always, my email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com.